Okay, thank you for coming. My name is Matt Totten Jr., and this is my talk, Oil in the Kavango, All Risk, No Reward for Namibia. And I guess one of the things you can take away, the theme for my talk, is risk versus reward. Anytime we're doing extractive industry projects, it's always a balance of risk and reward and how we manage risk. So obviously, from the title of my presentation, you might be able to take my opinion from this. And if there are any ReconAfrica investors online or in the audience, I know I can seem like the bad guy. I'm not here to bring you good news, but what I can guarantee you is that I'm speaking from a place of no financial interest in this. I have no stock interest in this play at all, long or short. I have never taken a dime and never will take a dime for speaking publicly about this. And I am a former oil and gas professional. I am no longer in that industry, but it doesn't wipe away my experience, my degrees, that specialized in petroleum geology specifically. And because I'll be speaking critically about the project and the company behind it, it's fair that you know who I am. And why I'm in Namibia. So I actually met the most amazing person of my life, who unsurprisingly is Namibian. And she convinced me to move to Namibia with her, and we've gotten married. So I'm now permanently based in Namibia, married to a Namibian. So that's why I'm here. And sort of serendipitously, you have a former oil and gas professional in Namibia when this project kicked off, or when the public found out. And my wife actually is the one who read a National Geographic article by an investigative reporter that kind of let the world know this project was kicking off. And she came to me and she said, "What do you think about this?" And I started looking into it. I started reading their papers, and I was horrified. I was like, there's no way the most arid country in Southern Africa can support a frack play in the most important agricultural area of Namibia, in the most important wildlife area of Namibia, in the most important watershed of Namibia. So that's why I got involved. And that's kind of where I'm speaking from today. So with that, let me see if my presentation will continue. Okay, so what I want to do is, most people I haven't met, there are some actually some oil and gas professionals in Namibia, but we're kind of few and far between. So I felt like I should start my talk with some background information. So what and where is the Kavango Basin? This is the claimed basin discovery of ReconAfrica. Now, this is a map of Southern Africa, and you can see Namibia highlighted in red. And there's this orange blob up here in the northern edge of Namibia. And the thing is, exploration in Namibia started in what was called the Owambo Basin back in the 1960s and continued on into the early 2000s. And then in early 2010s or mid 2010s, let's say 2013 to 2018, this company, from Canada, said, they got a hold of some data, and they discovered one of the deepest onshore basins in the world, called the Kavango Basin. And they said, this is going to be incredibly productive. Nowhere in the world do you find a basin this deep that doesn't produce liquid hydrocarbons. And the implication being, this is kind of a sure thing. So, and then the company also started making an analog. The whole project was kind of based on an analog to a play that Shell was doing, a frack shale, a gas shale play that you'd have to frack in Southern Africa in this Permian Karoo. And the company said, hey, we think we have the same sort of rocks up in Namibia, in northeast Namibia. And they went about acquiring the exploration licenses for that and promoting their project. Okay, so this is a map. Here's Namibia again. And it's sort of a composite map of the different watersheds in and around Namibia. So the kind of most important here is the Okavango Delta's watershed that starts in the Angolan highlands. But you have a lot of other systems that empty into the Kavango River and make their way into the Okavango River and make their way into the Okavango Delta in Botswana. But in Namibia, Namibia is kind of interesting and unique because within Namibia, all of the river systems are ephemeral, which means they only flow at the surface during the rainy season. But this does not mean you don't have underground rivers the rest of the year. And most importantly for this project, you have the Omatako River flowing right by where ReconAfrica is drilling that empties out into the Okavango River and into the Delta. So a big important point here is that where ReconAfrica is working is upstream of the Okavango River and the Okavango Delta. So any sort of pollution or contamination or environmental issues that happen here will very likely make their way from the Kavango into the river system and into the inland delta. And because this is an inland delta, nothing really makes its way out of here. So if pollutants make it into the delta, they probably will stay there. Now I'm waiting for the slide to catch up. Okay, let's zoom in. This is the Kavango. Here's the Caprivi strip getting started here. And what you see here, this is ReconAfrica's petroleum exploration license in northeast Namibia. And in the area, what do you see? Farms, 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 farms. This is a really important agricultural area for Namibia. We see community forest, community forest, community forest. This area is surrounded by conservancies, and this is part of one of the largest conservancies in the world, a transnational multi-boundary conservancy called the Kawe. And then on this map, you see at the time this image was taken, these were all of ReconAfrica's proposed wells, and some of these are still proposed wells. But these first two wells, this 6-2 well was the first exploration well they drilled near Kawe village, and the 6-1 well was the second well they drilled next to Mbambi village. And all the red lines here are the 2D seismic lines that they recently acquired in the area, that they just released some data on that I'll get to later in the talk. Let's zoom out a little bit more. And what we see here is Recon's petroleum exploration license in Namibia and their license in Botswana. And remember, I showed you the watershed image because what stays in the Kavango what happens in the Kavango doesn't necessarily stay there. It's upstream of the delta. But ReconAfrica likes to say, hey, we're far enough from the river and we're far enough from the delta, nothing bad can happen. All right, and if this project was to continue, of course, these two wells wouldn't be the only wells they would drill. In fact, ReconAfrica likes to compare the size of their basin to the Eagleford Shale Frack Basin in Texas, United States, saying it's about the same area. And then an even more prolific basin, the Permian Basin, they say it's just a little bit smaller than that. So this is what they tell investors to say, hey, it's potential to be a lot of oil here. But what I'll show is this has always been an unconventional frack play. And what happens if you drill the number of wells that are in, say, the Eagleford Shale in Texas, which has over 20,000 wells in that play. And this is, so what I did is I took all these wells, you can see the outline of the Eagleford in Texas, and here it is to scale across the Kavango. I'm not saying this is where they'll drill their wells, I'm just trying to give you scale for what 20,000 wells over 20 plus years in an unconventional frack play looks like. I don't think it takes much imagination to see this would transform the Kavango in a very detrimental way. Okay, and here's a picture, it's loading now, of a frack play in Colorado. And the thing about unconventional plays is look at the density of rigs and all the infrastructure you have to put in, pipelines, roads, storage facilities. I mean, it just scars the landscape across gigantic, enormous areas. Now, the Kavango is one of the most pristine wildlife areas and subsistence farm areas in Namibia and in Southern Africa. If this project were to succeed, and the other thing to know is that, I'll speak more about this shortly, but Recon now says, oh, it's only conventional wells. But the thing is, you can't have conventional wells without an unconventional play underneath it feeding oil and gas into those conventional deposits. You can't have conventional without unconventional 98% of the time. There's some unique instances where that's not necessarily the case, but the play they're talking about that they've promoted to their investors is not one of those exceptions. Now, to just go back to Texas for a second. Sorry, these slides are taking a little long to load. So there was a massive oil and gas boom in Texas and New Mexico over the last couple decades, especially with the frack boom. And hundreds of thousands of wells were drilled across this region. And, you know, oil and gas is volatile. It's a commodity. It's a very volatile commodity. During the coronavirus pandemic, oil fell to negative value. That meant if you wanted to sell oil, you'd have to pay the buyer to take it, to store it. First time in history that happened. So of course, you know, when you have booms, you have a lot of small companies come in, drill, drill, drill. And the interesting, I guess on their perspective, the great thing about unconventional plays is every well's a hit. You know where the oil generating rock is and you're just drilling into that. So every well's a hit. And you have to drill exponentially more wells. But when the commodity price falls, all those little companies go out of business. And now there's more than 100,000 oil and gas wells in Texas and New Mexico that are idle. And of those 100,000 idle wells, 7,000 are orphaned wells, or what they call zombie wells. So this means the company went out of business. They don't have the money to go and properly abandon the well. So essentially the well's open or temporarily abandoned in a way that's not to standard. And guess who gets to pay for that? The taxpayer. Now Texas and New Mexican taxpayers are on the hook for at least $1 billion over the coming years for those 7,000s I showed you and the 13,000 more they project. So that seems like a risk we need to consider, this price volatility of the commodity, before we greenlight projects like this and say it's going to make everybody prosperous. Everybody's going to share in this. Maybe there'll be certain people that share in the short term, but this is a socialized loss. And I think that's very important to keep in mind here for any oil and gas project. So how do we explore for oil? Let's all pretend that I just hired you guys as new, what I like to call rock lickers, geologists, new geologists. I hired you into my oil and gas company, and we're going to go find a new frontier basin to explore. What we do is we say, let's get some aerial photographs, let's get some satellite views, and let's send my rock lickers around the country to map all the faults and dipping beds and what type of rocks they are, what their age is, and we'll create a map of the country or the area we're interested in. We'll hire an airplane to fly a tight grid pattern with a magnetic and a gravity sensor to collect right over the surface. We'll collect this magnetic and gravity data. And we can make these maps, remote sensing maps, to kind of get an idea what we're looking for with all of this information is where is there a gigantic bowl in the ground filled with sediments, with sand and mud that over millions of years turned into rocks. And we're looking for a deep basin because deep basins tend to have the highest potential for having all the necessary ingredients you need for an oil and gas project. And so this is the Owambo Basin. Here's a Tosha pan, give you some reference. And you can kind of see like these outcrops here, these are the Otabi carbonates and limestones, and they're kind of dipping into the bowl. And then these sediments, these Kalahari sediments, are the newest sediments, and they're sort of the top layer of if you had your bowl, and this is the edge of the bowl here, and then we start layering it with different sediments. The top layer of those sediments is the Kalahari. So you can kind of see the basin here. And this rainbow map is based on all of that magnetic data, gravity data, and seismic data. You can see the depth. You can see the bowl and where the bowl is deep. And in fact, there's a few exploration wells and stratigraphic tests across here. They were all dry holes. And the most important one for this talk is the Etosha ST1 well. It's taking a second to load. So this is a image Recon published. It's very hard to read, as a lot of their publicly available data is. And so this is the Etosha, it was drilled in 1964, stratigraphic test 1 well. And you can see there was a geologist, probably a young guy, just got hired out of grad school. And as they were drilling and cuttings were coming up to the surface, he was describing them, saying, hey, I see sandstone here, and I see a basalt formation here, or a shale formation here, and maybe I got a sniff of gas, or the shakers had a little bit of oil on it. And this is, as the cuttings come to the surface, they're linked to the depth at which they think they drilled them. And with this, we kind of can create a log of that spot in Earth and what the subsurface looks like. And because no wells have been drilled until ReconAfrica in the Kavango, this was the closest well they have, something like 300 plus kilometers away. Now, once we collect all this data, there we go, we can start to create a model or a picture of the subsurface. So remember, I sent my rock lickers along the surface to tell me what they found there. So I have this data. I'm mapping these contacts. This is where this formation I see on surface. This is where this formation on surface. And then I have my little point data points at that location with the wells. And these are actually, this is a cross section across that Owambo Basin area, kind of laid out in a line. And now we lay the data we got from the wells here, and we can kind of get an idea of what's down in the subsurface. Now, where the wells kind of bottom out, and we're kind of inferring this section here where you don't have wells come down. And this was the cross section of the Owambo Basin that was made into the early 2000s. I'm going to have to lead my slides a little more. It takes a few seconds to load. Okay. And then, okay, while it's loading, now once we have this sort of basic picture, now we're going to start spending some real money. And the first big set of data that costs money is your seismic data. Now, it's a lot cheaper to shoot seismic than it is to drill wells. And, but, it's still an expense, but we need it to pick where our expensive wells are gonna go. And so this is a seismic section. What we do is we drive a truck along the surface, and this is a 2D line. And usually what they do is you hire a truck that's has a lot of mass and shakes, and it can send a lot of energy down into the subsurface. All right, and then what happens is those waves go down and they bounce off of formations. And then we can measure with microphones along the surface what that travel time was. And then like a sonogram, you can sort of create an image of the subsurface, and then you hire a geologist to interpret what you got. And from there, you decide where to drill your exploration wells. And exploration wells are the highest, like in sort of the exploration phase of a project. They're going to be your highest capital investment. You don't want to drill blind. That's why you do all of this work first, because you're limited by capital, and rigs cost money. And so with all that data, we say, okay, here we think we can drill and get what we need. And what ReconAfrica was doing for their first wells, and this is their first well in Kawe. There's Kawe village there. This is their farmland right here. And then here's the gigantic well pad that they need to create. And exploration wells tend to be smaller than production wells, and definitely smaller than frack well pads. But anyway, this is that's kind of the process. And I'll show you that ReconAfrica's kind of gone about it in an unconventional way. Okay, so what I'm going to show you next is I'm going to lead you through, I'm good, thank you. I'm going to lead you through what unconventional frack drilling and water injection wells are, because this is very important. So historically in the oil and gas industry, what we do is we just think, we do all that work and we say, hey, we think we found an accumulation of oil and gas, and the geology is right to trap it. And because this oil and gas is in a porous, permeable sandstone, we can just drill a vertical well, and the pressure here will push the oil and gas out of the well, and we can get a large volume. We don't need as many wells when in conventional settings. And notice that this oil and gas-rich shale, it's getting buried down deep, and that deep pressure and temperature is cooking the organics, and that's what's actually bubbling off oil droplet by gas molecule into filling up the shale, which is why it's an unconventional target, and then why it gets into the sandstone and finds its way into a trap. But in the last 20 years, a convergence of technologies allowed the oil and gas industry to expand into, not just looking for the source rocks as, hey, we need this to generate the oil and gas, but we can actually drill straight into these wells. And then we can pump millions of liters of water. We need anywhere, depending on the length of this horizontal portion of the well, we'll need anywhere from 5 to 40 plus million liters of water per well to actually create man-made permeability, to open up the rock, break it, and allow the trapped oil and gas here, because the rock is very tight, allow that into the wellbore, and then we can produce it. But the thing is, all this water you pump down there, it doesn't stay down there. It has to flow back to the surface. Okay? And now that water is toxic, highly toxic. You can't, the economics are not such you can recycle this water. I mean, you have to drill so many of these wells, and they cost so much more than the conventional wells. You're already limited to what your return on investment is going to be, and definitely related to the price of oil and gas. But it flows back to the surface, and then we got to get rid of it because it's a hazardous wastewater. And so what you typically do is you'll pipeline it, you'll drill an injection well, you'll pipeline it over, and you'll pump it into a disposal reservoir. But the thing is, if you can't get rid of this water, you have to shut your field in. You can't produce anymore. And if you're not producing, you're not making money. And so you tend to inject at the highest amount you think the rock can take. And unfortunately, this is actually where a lot of the aquifer pollution happens, is in these water injection wells. You can definitely have instances where the casing corrodes, or you have bad cement jobs, and so the fluids down here can cross-connect up into your aquifers. But actually, as an oil and gas professional, I'm always way more worried about the wastewater injection wells, because you are pumping serious volumes of hazardous wastewater at high pressure. And this is where a lot of the breaching happens. And in Oklahoma, where I come from, it was proven that these wastewater injection wells were also creating earthquakes in an ancient fault system. And the reason they know that is because there was I think it was a big storm and the power went out. So all the wastewater injection wells shut off. And then when the power came back on, they all started up again. And then boom, 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 there was a series of earthquakes that went off in northern Oklahoma. So, you know, there's a lot of risk associated with this. And this is part of frack plays. And honestly, it's part of conventional's plays too, because whenever you produce oil and gas, you produce a lot of this brine, this non-potable hypersaline brines. And the thing about unconventional wells is when they start producing, they produce nice in the beginning, and then they're just a little bit of oil and gas like after a year and mostly water. So the economics is not as favorable, and you got a lot more water to get rid of, and you got a lot more wells drilling. Okay, so with that background, I think now you're all oil and gas explorers, so you understand the process. Let's meet ReconAfrica. They are a junior oil and gas exploration company from Canada, and their primary assets are those blocks I showed you in Namibia and Botswana. They just recently acquired a company that had a bunch of assets in Mexico, but Mexico banned fracking in 2020, so these assets are now effectively worthless. Okay, so this slide, this is from Questor Advisors. They're an advisor firm that was like, buy Recon. It's a great buy. But beware, buyer beware, based on their exploration program, should the results be disappointing, the downside to the stock could be substantial and the company may cease to exist. And that could happen overnight because they could release results about their well, and then the investors are like, oh, there's no oil there, sell, sell, sell. And then the company goes bankrupt, and then Namibians are left with the bag on cleaning up those wells because ReconAfrica didn't put any money into an escrow fund in case scenarios like that happened. All right, now who is ReconAfrica? So I call them the unconventional fracking specialists. I say unconventional because they're kind of doing exploration backwards, and that's unconventional in my opinion. And they are primarily fracking specialists. So for example, Scott Evans, he was the former COO, now the CEO. He was the VP of Halliburton, and he ran Halliburton's shale lab in Houston for many years. So he's a big shale guy, frack shale guy. Nick Steinsberger, he's one of the pioneers of developing the engineering behind fracking. So they brought him on board. We have Dr. James Granith here, waiting for that to come up. And the interesting thing about Granith, he did do a lot of geology in Africa, but he wrote this paper in I think it was published 2018, and the paper basically said, why not fracking in Africa? If you just read the title, it says, why not unconventional and conventionals in Africa? And Namibia looks great. But if you actually dig into it, it's the meaning is, you know, historically, Africa oil and gas has always been conventionals. Why can't we do unconventionals there too? Combine the two. And Namibia is a great place to start. Oops. And then there's Dan Jarvie, one of the fathers of fracking. He's kind of credited as being one of the 4 guys that developed the geology and the kind of being one of the pioneers into fracking in the Barnett Shale in Texas, in north central Texas. But my question is, there's somebody missing on this list, and it's the founder and my majority shareholder, Craig Steinke. Okay, so let's meet Craig Steinke. All right, so Craig Steinke, founder, majority shareholder of ReconAfrica. His first company was called Stormcat Energy, and they were primarily drilling coal bed methane wells in Wyoming, as I understand. And then the price of gas collapsed because everybody was in the industry drilling gas wells, and every well's a hit, and Stormcat went out of business. And they left the Wyoming taxpayer with 2,000 wells, 2,000 zombie wells, and $10 million in unpaid bonds. Let me go back. All right. And then because it didn't work out in America, he went to Europe. And in Europe, his big crown jewel in his company realm was the Paris Basin. And the Paris Basin was going along great. And then the country of France banned fracking. So those assets became worthless and he sold the company. And at the same time, he had a private company called R2 Energy that later became Renaissance Oil Corporation, but R2 Energy was working on a frack play in Spain. And he told the Spanish people, hey, it is impossible for anything bad to happen, like, quote, impossible, in a public hearing. And let's just say his project didn't work out there. So he teamed up with a buddy and changed the company into, turned it into Renaissance Oil Corporation. They bought all these assets in Mexico. And then the Mexican government banned fracking in 2020. So their assets went bust. And what's interesting is at the same time, he had this company, ReconAfrica, he started in 2013, that was trying to do fracking in Namibia, waiting for better oil prices to come along to get the project going. And at the peak of ReconAfrica's share price, which was about $11 in late July, $10.5, $11 US, Recon buys Renaissance. And when the Mexican government banned fracking, Renaissance went and farmed into the Botswana acreage. And so I think one of the reasons you don't see Craig on that team list for ReconAfrica on the website is because Recon bought Renaissance. And then there was lots of Renaissance shares becoming Recon shares at that inflated price. And so I'm not an expert in securities law, but kind of sounds a little bit questionable. So what I'm trying to say is Craig has a history of downplaying the risks. And let Craig speak for himself on this one.
Steinke says they have complied with all environmental laws.
You can see this is about half-inch high-grade steel. Like this is pretty serious stuff. There's just no way that the water can have any contact with production. I mean, I say to these people who are critics, who've likely never been to Namibia, nor let alone the Kavango region, come to the Kavango and let's just have a look at the environment. And then you tell me that these people don't deserve a better lifestyle, especially if they're standing on a major source of energy.
Kind of speaks for itself, I feel. Absolutely no way. Impossible. I can tell you, having worked for BP, bad things can happen, and they can happen in a hurry. And when they go bad, they tend to go bad in a big way and expensive ways. And it's usually not the oil company that goes bankrupt that pays the price. It makes me wonder if Shell, when in the 1950s they went to the Niger Delta and said, you're going to transform from fishermen and farmers into wealthy oil people. Now the Niger Delta people have some of the shortest lifespans in the world because their water got polluted, their soil got polluted, they can't even grow food, their food security's gone, and it was one of the most abundant places in the world. And the Kavango's the same for Namibia, so I think I'll just chalk that up to theatrics. All right, so I am claiming that the Kavango project is an unconventional project. And why do I say that? Because in 2018, the company hired this independent engineering firm out of Calgary to say, hey, what is the resource, the unconventional resource? Ignore any conventional potential. Just we want to know the unconventional, the frack potential of the Kavango. Then, and this is weird, they decided to do their exploration drilling first, which is the slide that's coming up now. Okay, and they applied for they submitted their environmental impact assessment, and they got an ECC within 2 months. And you know why? Because nobody in Namibia knew this project was going on. There wasn't a single interested, affected person who submitted something to say, hey, we think there's concerns here. So fast-tracked, 2 months, public doesn't care, nobody knows, let's go. And in the EIA, they say, hey, we're targeting equivalent rocks to the hydrocarbon-prone unconventional deposits within the Karoo group of the main Karoo Basin in South Africa, our analog. May, July 2020, ReconAfrica publishes its Kavango research report. And in it, they say very clearly, while the initial target is an unconventional play in the lower Permian age Karoo shales, the initial target, the potential of shallower conventional targets will also be tested. Yeah, if we find conventionals, that's a nice upside. We'll take that. But, you know, our main target is the unconventionals. They also say of tremendous concern in South Africa is the water resource. A significant requirement for unconventional plays requiring fracture stimulation. Same things, it's going to be even worse in Namibia. Like I say, the most arid country in sub-Saharan Africa. Then in May 2020, Craig goes on an investor promotional tour, going on podcasts, getting interviewed. And he says in these interviews, hey, we think we found a 30,000-foot sedimentary basin. That's about 9,000 meters. And this guy, Bill Cathy in Houston, who's a magnetics expert, he's interpreted our magnetic data. So that's how we came to the 30,000-foot basin everybody else missed. And there's not a basin in the world this deep that doesn't produce liquid hydrocarbons. And my interpretation of that is like, this is a pretty sure thing here. This basin is 30,000 feet. You know, we're good to go. And he also says we're expecting up to 6,000 feet Permian, a thick Permian petroleum system in the Kavango. And then he talks about the rig they bought and have imported into Namibia. They bought it because they were trying to get down to as deep in the basin as they could. 12,000 feet, about 4,000-ish meters, let's say. Perfect, because we believe the shales, the Permian petroleum system we're going to encounter, are between around 8,000 feet and 11,000 feet. Divide these roughly by 3 to get meters. Okay, now something changes around September, October, November 2020. The Namibian public finds out about the project. And really first by some Namibian activists, Friday for Future Windhoek, led by Ina Shikango here in Namibia, she starts getting on social media and says, hey, you guys know there's this oil project next to the Okavango Delta going on? You know, we got to speak up. We got to do something about this. And Ina's at COP26 right now, by the way, representing Namibia. And then a National Geographic investigative reporter publishes this article letting the world know, hey, there's about to be an oil and gas project going on next to the Okavango Delta. And this is actually the article my wife read and brought to my attention, and this is when I got involved, late October, early November. Okay, so then, this is kind of important. So that was September, October, November 2020, public's getting aware. Then November 10th in Houston, the company gives this, the opening of the Deep Kavango Basin 2-hour presentation to the Houston petroleum industry. And they say, again, the basement is approximately 9,000 meters deep, and the extent is seen as quite extensive. So this is 9,000 meters in lots of directions. And it is estimated that this basin has generated up to 100 billion barrels of oil. And yes, that's billion with a B. Now, if your basin generates 120 billion barrels of oil, that doesn't mean you're producing 120 billion. You usually produce some percentage of that, like 10%, 20%. It depends on the rocks you have in the basin. But let's even say they can produce 10%, which is, you know, kind of in line with frack plays. That's 12 billion barrels of oil. Get in now while the price is cheap. The target is conventional oil in the early going, and we hope to be in the position to truck conventional oil. Now, that's an interesting change in communication. What happened before early November? What happened where now it's only conventional oil? In that same presentation, they show this map. It's their depth to basin map that that guy Bill Cathy put together, showing the depth to basin. So that means how deep is the bowl? When do we hit granite, essentially? When do we hit the African craton that all these sediments would be stacked upon and filling the bowl with? Now, this is the Kavango Basin, in quotes. And this is actually off screen here, like if you go past the ST1 well, that's actually where most of the, starting with ST1 well, that's where most of the Owambo deep basin stuff is done. They called this the Owambo deep for some weird reason. But when I look at this map, I mean, the dark blues are the deepest part of the map, and the reds are the shallowest part of the basin, right? When you look at that map, is this the Kavango deep? Does just comparatively, if when we go to the west it gets shallower and this gets deeper, is that a 30,000 foot basin based on all the work that's been done over here before? This is their map. I mean, they showed this at a geological presentation in Houston and nobody called them on it. Okay, now they showed this cross section. So this is looking, if we cut the bowl in half, now we're looking at the layer cake diagram again. And so based on that map they showed before, they're like, hey, here's the ST1 well. The reason we had some really nice organic rich rocks in here, but they just weren't buried deep enough to cook. And so if we just head towards Botswana to the east there, you know, we'll see that what they call the Owambo deep. Everything I've seen done before is when you go to the west, you have the Owambo deep. So this is a bit weird. But okay, so you have a little deep area, then we have the structural high, and then woof, there's our 30,000 foot deep basin. That's our 9,000 meter basin. And look at this, what do we estimate? We're going from 620 feet of Permian source rock, and ask people who have seen this ST1 well, I think they would disagree with this interpretation of 620 feet of Permian source rock. But okay, it thickens into the Kavango deep, and they say they think they're gonna get 6,000 feet thick of source rock, generating those, at a conservative estimate, 120 billion barrels of oil. Note, I gave a presentation at the hosted by the Women's Leadership Center here in Windhoek in August 18th. And then the next week, I want to say, they published their August 2021 presentation. And in my presentation, I said they released some of their initial well data from this first well they drilled. So that's what this is here. And I said this is demonstrably false based on what they released in that presentation. And a couple days later, this slide was gone. It was no longer in their investor presentations and has not resurfaced since. And again, December 2020, the public gets involved. There was people take to the street now in Windhoek. People marched to the UN and said, what is going on here? You know, the UN, the UNESCO World Heritage, this is part of your purview to be stewards of these areas. And a big thing in this protest march was that the Dilo Hills UNESCO World Heritage Site was actually included in the Botswana exploration lease area. And because of this protest march, UNESCO, UN petitioned Botswana, and Botswana took it out of Recon's area. Okay, so now we're in January 2021. It's loading up a video. So January 2021, they spud their first well. And this is before they've shot any seismic. They're just going ahead and drilling. And what you see here is an unlined mud pit. Some Namibian journalists went up there and took this video and photos. And just look at the area, the amount of forest that had to be cut down. Ooh. Thank you. Can you just take this away for me? Thank you so much. Yeah, just, I mean, this is one rig. And like I said, exploration well pads tend to be a lot smaller than the production pads that come after it. And, you know, so journalists asked ReconAfrica, hey, looks like you didn't line your pit because, you know, in the United States, this is the law to line your pits. Whenever you drill below the fresh water, you know, you need to line that pit because you're going to start bringing up some pretty nasty stuff. And most of the time, the drilling fluid is pretty toxic itself. And what did ReconAfrica said? They said, you know, we actually use this pond liner that farmers use to keep water in their ponds. And because of that, we don't need to line the pit. This is actually a more expensive, a more advanced technology than the synthetic high-density polyethylene liners that most oil companies use. And on top of that, our drilling fluid is water-based, which is true. I believe them. It is water-based. I would drill a water-based well on my exploration wells too, but water-based muds are not 100% non-toxic. Drilling muds are a cocktail of different things to keep the well stable and do all the things drilling muds needs to do. And on top of that, not only is it non-toxic, it can be used as a fertilizer. So we can actually take our wastewater and dump it on the local farmland. They can use it. Look how nice this is. You know, this is local development by an oil company, and we're going to take our wastewater and we're going to turn it into fertilizer on the subsistence farmland of the most poor people in Namibia. That infuriates me. As a former oil and gas specialist, the fact that they say we didn't need to line our pit, and in fact, our drilling mud's so safe and so organic, we can use it on farmland of the poorest people in the country. Essentially, free way to get rid of your wastewater. Okay, so let me tell you about drilling wastewater. Okay, water-based mud, I'll give them that. On the level of toxicity scale, it's definitely the least toxic. But what happens if you have a loss of circulation of it and you got to put all these additives to sit in the mud system to save the well? And what about that you're drilling to these deep, deep depths for your deep, deep basin? The chance that you're going to drill into heavy metals, radioactive materials, hypersaline brines for sure. Most of the subsurface is filled with hypersaline brines. This is not potable water. This is wastewater. Okay, that's what goes into the pit. That's why you have a pit. It's to contain these things. And we line the pits because we don't want it permeating into the soil and down into the groundwater. And we don't want a big rain event in the rainy season to fill this up and flood it and go into the local river. Okay, and the picture I'm bringing up now is a picture of the first well. And here's Kawe village. Here's their farmland that they're going to take this water, or let it evaporate and then take the leftover and fertilize the land with. This is the Omatako River. It's about 1 kilometer away. Do you think if wastewater permeates into the soil here, what's the chance it makes its way into that underground ephemeral river upstream of the Okavango River, which is upstream of the Okavango Delta? And let me just say, this drilling pad is right next to a village. Rigs run 24/7, 7 days a week, as long as the well needs to be drilled. And they're loud. And they have diesel generators going off. You think they were happy about that? If somebody came to your house, put a drilling rig a couple 100 meters away, would you say something? Would you go to Parliament and say, hey, this isn't cool. This is my home. Why is there a rig that showed up out of nowhere? And Recon says they consulted the locals. There are people that contest that. There are people, local people, that say, hey, they just showed up and kicked me off my land. And there is a case at the Supreme Court in Namibia right now, where at this well, at the Mbambi well, the guy who lived there said, hey, you need to get rid of these guys, and you need to return my land how it was, and get rid of this rig. Now, what's interesting is I've talked a lot about the mud system, or the mud pit, and how they didn't line it. And they said, hey, there's no need to line the pit with a synthetic barrier. What we're doing is fine. But then they just lined the berm of the mud pit on their second well after they got flack for it. And here's an aerial photo of that. I wonder, the cynical side of me wonders, if I was walking around the road and I saw the tarpaulin, cool, everything's fine. They lined the pit now. But then again, like, the drilling fluid's supposed to be 100% non-toxic, biodegradable. They've never shown an ingredient list of what they're using. They've never shown an ingredient list of their water-based mud system. We just have to take them for their word. And, you know, Steinke keeps telling me I'm out of line. Nothing can go wrong. And I'm telling you, as a former oil and gas person, lots of stuff can go wrong. I don't go, when you go to your doctor and he says you need to have surgery, and the doctor says, or you ask the doctor, hey, what's the risks involved? Like, could something go wrong? And the doctor says, hey, no, nothing's ever gone wrong. This is great. You know, I'm the best doctor in the world. You know, I got this team of people, nothing, like no risk at all. You run away from that doctor. You trust the doctor that says, hey, every surgery has risk. Every surgery has risk, but this is how we mitigate those risks. That's not what Steinke said. And why is Steinke getting interviewed by CNN? He's not even on the team. He's the major shareholder. Who cares if he's the founder of the company? He's not on the technical team. Why is Recon, why are the media going to him for interviews? Because everybody knows ReconAfrica is Craig Steinke. Okay, so I took a couple, this was like a drone shot, and I took a couple of snapshots from the drone shot and made a composite so you can kind of see the aerial extent. It's not like they're putting rigs into the Kalahari Desert here. This is forest, this is farmland. And like I said, I think I've laid out the evidence that this was a frack play. It was marketed as a frack play. It still is a frack play. And only when the public got involved did the ReconAfrica public-facing communication change. What happens over the next 20, 25 years, or whenever they get started doing the Unconventional project? What happens when there's 20,000 of these, and bigger ones too, because this is not a frack pad. This is an exploration well pad. They double in size for frack wells. You have to put so much more equipment. I mean, how else do you get 45 million liters of water on site to do your frack play, to do your frack job? Now, the public got involved. They said, we want to talk to you, and we want to talk to you in Windhoek. A lot of people in Windhoek want to talk to you. And they, my feeling was, begrudgingly agreed to do a talk about the seismic they wanted to do. And they were very clear, this talk is only going to be about the seismic, but they didn't stay that way because people had questions. And what was very funny is that from the start of the meeting, it was defensive. I know there's people here who are at this meeting, and just, you know, ask them what the tone of that meeting was. It wasn't my feeling, having been there. There I am. Where am I? Right here, asking questions, asking a very important question, I think. It was defensive, felt insulted. There's people who have 40 plus years of oil and gas experience in this audience, and they said they felt disrespected. They'd never seen an oil company come into your house and just say this is the way it's going to be. It's already done. Nothing to worry about, folks. You know, all that unconventional stuff. We changed our story. We redid the geology suddenly, and now, this is what direct quote, we are going to do conventional oil. And on top of that, after I spoke up and I said, hey, all of your investor presentation says unconventional, frack, 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 frack. And, you know, and now you just say conventional only, like you haven't even finished your first well. They just got started on their first well. They're a month in. And you say all of a sudden, without any new data, we just magically reinterpreted it and nothing to worry about. And what they said, and this is a direct quote, we launched a comprehensive regional tectonic and stratigraphic study that was completed in March 2020 and established that conventional oil and gas and fundamentals that are the basis of our operational program. The funny thing about this, let me see if I can find the pointer here. Whoops, okay, never mind. The funny thing about this is that when I got up to talk, I was referencing something from July 2020. And then they told me that said unconventionals is the primary target, July 2020. And they said, hey, we completed this thing in March 2020 that says unconventionals are off the table. And I was like, I know how a calendar works. Okay, so what is the current status? Let's fast forward to today. They finished drilling their Kawe well. It was 3,810 meters, I think either 3,810 or 3,800 meters planned depth. And they drilled to 2,294 meters. That is 1.5 kilometers shallow. Whoa. I thought you promised a 9,000 meter deep basin. What's going on here? And the second well, that was about 16 kilometers to the north, the Mbambi well. Same depth planned, or just within 10 meters. They got a little deeper, 2,780 meters drilled. That's 1 kilometer shallow. Uh-oh. And then in late October, they finished their 2D seismic acquisition, and I'll show you what, we'll go over that data in a minute. Okay. And what they said when they released their first well data from the Kawe well, no Permian Karoo age source rocks were encountered. Whoa. Thought we said we were expecting 6,000 feet. What is that? 2,000 meters. And this is really weird. No drill stem test taken of their productive area zones of interest. I've never heard of a company drilling stratigraphic wells or exploration wells in a frontier basin that doesn't take a drill stem test. That's where you finish drilling the well and you pull the bit out and then you go down with a special tool and a valve opens and it allows the fluids, hopefully oil and gas, to flow into the drill stem. And then you can say you can measure what volume over what time did we collect. And that is a really good indicator of did we find a Permian system, a petroleum system. They didn't do that. In fact, they didn't even finish abandoning their wells. They just said, hey, we're going to come back later. We're moving the rig, which is really time intensive, takes a lot of manpower to move that big machine and all the equipment. We're going to do the next well, and then we didn't do the drill stem test there, and then one day we'll come back and do the drill stem test. That's basically what they've said about that. Now, this is the rocks they drilled through and what they're calling their oil and gas shows of this well. Now, first, they drilled very shallow Etio sandstone, and it produced 7,000 cubic meters per hour of fresh water. Really high quality water. That's the water resource that's under threat right now. This is the water resource in this shallow area that the Kavango people rely on. What happens if you pollute this? does the government have money to go, build them homes in Windhoek and make sure they have water? Okay. And then they're calling these zone 1, zone 2, zone 3. This is their Karoo rocks. And then this blue stuff is a limestone, a carbonate, that they're calling pre-Karoo. Why don't you just say what it is? Why do we have to call it pre-Karoo? We're pretty familiar with the rocks in the Owambo Basin, and this stuff isn't that far away. Should correlate some way. But you know why, in my opinion, is because they promised 2,000 meters of Karoo, and they only got a few hundred meters of it. What is that? Here it starts here. Yeah, 4, 6, 8, 10. That's 600. 700, 800 meters. So if we just call it pre-Karoo, maybe people will associate the two. These I think are much older than Permian. I think they're the Otabi group carbonates from the Cambrian and the Precambrian is what I think. And let's talk about these gas shows. All right, this is what they're calling a gas show. See how this scale bar goes from 0 to 5? Do you know what we measure gas at the top of the well head at? 0 to 10,000. 10,000 would mean 100% gas. They're showing 1, 2, 1, 1, 3, 5. That's 0.01 to 0.05% gas. I could go fart next to the gas chromatograph and get a bigger reading. I could open a can of beans next to the gas chromatograph and get a better reading. You're trying to tell the oil and gas, the investor community, that's a show? A show would be something like 100 to 150 units of gas. Okay, I'll believe that. But 2? 1? And the oil show. So these, they take a bunch of sidewall cores and send them to the lab, and then the lab does some work on them to be like, oh, we saw some fluorescence, might be an indicator of oil. That's on a scale of 0 to 100 units. And they're showing 0 to 20. Ooh, we get a nice spike close to 20. Again, I don't think that's very impressive myself. And on top of that, the Kawe well, they said they got this little oil sample. How much oil is that? Each one of these long lines is 1 milliliter. This is less than 1 milliliter volume of oil that they're trying to say, we proved a petroleum system in the Kavango Basin. Better get in while the price is low. And does this look a little familiar? HRT Namibia was an offshore oil and gas company that came here in 2013, drilled their first exploration well, pulled a vial of oil out, and who knows who this guy is on the far left? Knowledge Kati. International audience might not know who this guy is, but I assure you all the Namibians do. And then this is the CEO of HRT Namibia, and this here is Honorable Prime Minister Hage Geingob. And I'm unfamiliar with this gentleman on the far right. I think maybe the Petroleum Commissioner or the Ministry of Mines and Energy at the time. Minister? Okay. Throwing a big party. We got a vial of oil out of our, and I found a radio lab. Does everybody know radio, or not radio lab, radio wave here in Namibia? It's a radio station. There's a journalist that was going around, hey, they've discovered oil offshore Namibia. They think it's like 10 billion barrels plus. What do you think? And everybody's like, I think it's great. It's going to lead to economic recovery, but I hope the government doesn't, misuse the funds. This company drilled 2 more wells that were all dry hole, and everybody pulled out. And I assure you, these guys made a dime on that project. But what did Namibia see? Lots of promises. Okay, let's fast forward 8 years. ReconAfrica 2021, after they've drilled these first 2 wells. ReconAfrica CEO gets invited to the State House to visit now President, Honorable President Hage Geingob. And now this is the Minister of Mines and Industry, Mr. Tom Alwindo, and the Petroleum Commissioner, Ms. Maggie Shino. Okay, and that same day or within a day, they have a friend online called oilprice.com that initially they were paying to write these glowing articles about their project for investors. And now oil price says they used to pay us, they don't pay us now, and we still have stock. But they're still the greatest oil play of the decade. Better get in while it's cheap. And so that CEO is because the State House put out a media that said CEO Craig Steinke, and even the president in the meeting called him the CEO. So even in Namibia, everybody knows who's running ReconAfrica here. Okay, and Steinke, during the visit, told Geingob the company has discovered oil where drilling took place and would now assess the commercializing of the oil. Sounds a lot like HRT to me. And then the president said, hey, coming from Canada, I was not worried that you would do something wrong to the environment. Okay, is that the environmental impact assessment now? All right. Okay, so, you know, I'm just one guy, and I'm not in the oil and gas industry anymore. But next door to Recon, this pink blocks, and the green is Recon's blocks, and this is a map of Namibia, and these are all the petroleum the exploration areas of Namibia. And the pink blocks, there's a company called Monitor Exploration. And after Recon released their data, they made this cross-section. Now you can see they took the author's cross-section here, guy who made this cross-section. Also, they copyrighted this, which is weird. They put Hoek 2014, but they actually copyrighted this, which seems a bit dodgy. Monitor, should probably credit the person who made the cross-section. And then they duplicated it and flipped it to make a bowl. And then based on what Recon said they drilled in the 6-2 well, they said, hey, this is what we think. We think they're on the shallow side of the Owambo Basin, and we're in the deep part. And of course, the Karoo sediments, there's not really anything there. We're targeting the deep Watabi carbonates because we think those limestones can self-source themselves. But even if it works, what we have is small. A couple 100 million barrels of oil maximum. So very different marketing strategy between these two companies, I have to say. All right, 2D seismic data. So first of all, I'm going to go over the seismic in the area. So first of all, especially at that February meeting, Recon said, and they had all these diagrams of, hey, don't worry about the seismic acquisition. We're going to do it along existing roads, existing pathways. You know, we're not going to go into virgin forest. And then here is a photo of seismic truck lines through virgin forest, through the community forests. Here's another one. Wow. Now, the thing about seismic cuts, especially in arid regions, is they never heal. Just go up to Ethiopia, see where they've done seismic there, and you'll just see, as far as the eye can see, the straightest line ever through this arid desert or kind of arid region. Decades later, still there. And in fact, you know, Canada has been very aggressive shooting seismic inside Canada in their forest areas. And even in Canada, where it's a pretty wet place in Canada, those lines never heal. And they're experiencing severe ecological issues because now the predators have pathways that they didn't have before, so they can over predate the wildlife. Like It's a real disaster, and guess who's paying for it? The Canadian government. The Canadian government has to go in and hire firms to start doing really innovative things to get the forests to come back where the oil companies were. Why isn't that priced into a barrel of oil, I wonder? I have this saying about the oil industry, and I swear I'm not trying to bash the oil industry here. Like, my family's been in the oil industry. I'm very fortunate to have gotten a great education funded largely by the oil industry, and I had a really cool career doing amazing science projects. There was an alum at University of Oklahoma, an old oil and gas guy I loved. And he used to tell me, when he found out I was going to work full-time for BP, he said, oh yeah, BP, the biggest university without a football team. Because he's like, you're going to get training, like you're going to see data, you're going to do projects, and I did. And I have to say, especially when it comes to deep water oil and gas drilling, like in the Gulf of Mexico, the engineering and technology behind that stuff is on the level of sending people to the moon. You would not believe the engineering challenges the oil and gas industry has overcome. It's incredible. There are great people in it. I am not trying to bash the oil and gas industry, but I will say they have a bad history of privatizing the gains in the short term and socializing the losses in the long term. And the public needs to be aware of that, because you need to know what's coming 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road. Okay, this next slide is monitor exploration seismic data. And it is a bit pixelated because I pulled it from their website. But what you can see even on this pixelated thing is you have very clear reflectors going very deep. So this red line at the bottom, that's what they're calling their basement. And see how the seismic data gets really chaotic and messy underneath that red line? That's because the seismic waves are going into crystalline granite or some sort of igneous metamorphic rock complex, and they're scattering. And that's why we can tell the basement, because it gets really chaotic. And so this is in the monitor area, and it's deep. I'll call that a bed. That is definitely a sedimentary basin. And you can see they've made a little cartoon cross section to the south to kind of show what they think is going on as you go into actual surface outcrops. And then here is what Recon just released about a week ago, November 5th, I want to say. Yeah, November 5th. Come on, slide. All right. So this is one of their north-south lines. What do we see here? So this is their interpretation, not mine. This is they didn't label any of this. They didn't tell us which side's north, south. They didn't tell us what the different interpretations are. All we know is that the white lines are faults, okay? But when I look at this, I see terrible data. This is god-awful data. Ask any geophysicist in this audience, and I know there's a few here. They'll say, you need to go reshoot this data. I'm not working with this. And why? Because it's full of noise and multiples. See, it's such bad data, and they have to boost the signal to noise so much that you see all these little frowns and smiley faces throughout. We call those multiples. And they're just, noise that's getting boosted to get some kind of image here. And usually what we see in the shallow subsurface is really clear, especially if the beds are flat lying and sedimentary. We'll see very clear, very finely laminated lines here. And what do we say? We just see mush. And what really takes the cake about this line they put out, and it makes me wonder, do they even have a geophysicist working for them? Sorry, my laser pointer's going out. But see these blue and red lines on the right side? They are interpreting geologic structure or like sedimentary features in the basement, in that chaotic basement. And these lines are just noise. There's just noise in the basement. I don't believe this little smiley face on the right side that's deep for a second. You can see where the chaotic stuff starts. And where does it start? Shallow. They have a little graben feature there if you believe it. But let me show you something else about this seismic line. all right? You think, okay, hey, the red line there on the left side is at 800 milliseconds, which is shallow, very shallow. The thing is, we have to subtract 200 milliseconds off of that. You know why? Because their datum starts at 200 milliseconds, not at 0. So it's not 800 milliseconds, it's 600 milliseconds. And you got to subtract 200 milliseconds from all of this. So 30,000 foot, 9,000 meter basin in the Kavango. Give me a break. And this is an important slide coming up now. Oh, thank you so much. Okay, yeah, it's coming. Probably a big image, so it's taking a while to load. Am I doing all right, everybody? Am I boring? Am I boring you guys? Okay, and we will open it up for questions. I made sure that the Namibian Scientific Society invited the company to come answer questions because this is a public forum and we have questions. And is anyone from the company here in person? I know they have people in Namibia working for the company. I know there's a Namibian spokesperson. So am I correct to say nobody from the company showed up? Okay, I'm sure they're watching on Zoom. Probably under a fake name, as online tends to be. Okay, I will tell you one thing. I have no financial investment in this, but I'll talk in public about this. I'll put my name and reputation on the line about this, and I won't hide behind a fake online persona to discuss this. You know where to talk to me. You know what I think. You know who I am. You know where I'm coming from. And to the Recon investors out there, I'm not here to be I don't have it out for you, okay? I am here because I'm concerned about this project. I have been concerned from the day it started, or I found out about it. I've been concerned with every step of the process and how they continually downplay the risks, because who's going to bear the brunt of the long-term consequences of this project? And do we really think this project, if it is as great as Recon says, is going to bring shared prosperity to the Kavango people? Craig said to go up there and look. You know, I haven't been in the Kavango. I've driven the main road to Rundu. I've been to Rundu. I've driven the road into the Caprivi. And I'd love to go there, but I'm a little afraid of the company because I've been pretty public about saying, I don't believe what you're saying to the public, and I feel like you're downplaying the risks. And I've stayed away from going to the rig site because I've heard they have some pretty aggressive security guards out there. And the thing about Namibia is it's a wild, remote place. And if you want to know what my family thought about when my name, and at the time I didn't have junior, and I'm junior, there is a senior, and when my name came into the first National Geographic article where I was quoted, everybody thought I was my dad. My dad started getting hate mail. Pretty vicious stuff, I think, from Recon investors. So I pretty quickly went to the media and said, please put Junior on my name. So my dad doesn't have blowback at work, doesn't have these crazy emails showing up. So, you know, again, I'm putting my name on the line, but the people sending my dad hate mail aren't. Okay. So here's another line. And what's interesting about this, and I caught this yesterday, and I just bring it up because it's just very typical behavior of ReconAfrica. Again, I don't know for sure which side's west and which side's east. And remember I said they released this data on November 5th? And it said on that time, and I have the slide in the appendices if you want to see it, it said, thank God for the Wayback Machine. These guys have no idea that everything they publish is preserved online. Okay, anyway, it said east to west, all right? And so because they didn't annotate their stuff properly, I'm kind of guessing where this line is because they didn't do the basic geology to say, this is our map view, this is where the line is, it goes this side's west, this side's east. So they said in the November 5th, they said east to west. And so I was like, okay, this is the east side and that's the west side. That's a bit deceptive. Because when I look at that, remember, what I'm showing now is the November 12th annotation when I caught the change, when they changed it to west to east. But when they originally published it, it was east to west. And I was like, oh, okay. So we're going from that deep part into the shallow because they put it on backwards. It should be flipped. But then I started sharing a cross-section I made in some of the social groups. And I went to explain to a friend, look at what they did. Like, they're labeling it backwards. They're deceptively showing it backwards. And I shared this amongst the community. And then I went to tell this friend, look at what they did. And then I started to explain it. I was like, whoa, wait, I can't, what's going on here? And then I was like, oh man, they switched it. Somebody leaked geologist cross-section probably to the company from some of our, from a WhatsApp group where I shared it. And the Wayback Machine, it's sometime between November 8th and November 12th. They switched it. Okay, now I'll take them at their word. This side's west on the left, as you'd expect. This side's east. Okay, so they weren't being deceptive. They were being incompetent. All right, I've shown you a lot of data. Now this is sort of the next slide's a big one. There's a lot to see here, and I'm sorry. I'm a scientist. I go into the details. Everybody tells me, you over-explain. Nobody's going to understand it. Everybody's going to be bored. And I work really, 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 really hard to make it accessible to people who aren't geologists and oil and gas professionals, because it's important you know this. Thank you. Okay, so here's that monitor line, and I'll show you where that runs. It's somewhere around Otavi. And I've spent, my wife's, God bless her, I've spent so much time putting these things together, and I really, yeah, I love you a lot for putting up with me. Okay, so here's that monitor line. There's their cartoon section, so we can see from where it outcrops along the black. Okay, and then I've overlaid, this is Recon's own depth of basement map. Here's an actual cross seismic line that monitor has. Okay, south to north, monitor knows how to do it. We label our cross sections, we give us a map. That's how I was able to put this together. And then I had to kind of guess from the data which of these lines Recon shared publicly. That's a red flag. I'm sorry, folks. If I was a TA in structural geology in grad school, and I would dock all my students, if you don't label your cross sections, if I don't have a map view, this cross section is no good. I'm just supposed to guess? Thanks for making me do all the work. I don't even work for the company. I'm doing geology for them. Okay, this one's free. And this is my interpretation along this line. So that's the white line that goes from the end of that north part of the cross section, okay, to where I think their west to east line is. That originally, when I first did this, I had east over here and west over here. And then they re-annotated it, and I said, okay, I'll take you for your word now. This side's west. And then I matched the depth, the time, 200 milliseconds, 400 milliseconds. Hard to do because the clarity of the things they share, it's very unreadable. Again, the cynical side of me kind of wonders if that's deception, but the kind meditating part of me says, no, they probably just made a mistake. They just didn't take my structural geology class, my lab. Okay, anyway, sorry. But look at that line. When you actually depth correct it and get it corrected along the surface, does that look like a 30,000 foot, 9,000 meter basin to you? I'm sure they'll say, whoa, 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 you know, we just haven't shared this line. It gets deeper over here. You know, it's gonna have to get deep real quick, because what do we see? And this is what all the Namibian geologists have been telling me. Hey, this is the deep part of the basin, and everything thins, especially in the deep pre-Damara orogeny stuff up here. Okay, we're probably seeing this little interbasin high there. That bit there is probably somewhere around here. Then it deepens a little bit, but that's basin at 1,000 milliseconds, and you don't have to delete it from my cross-section. You don't have to delete those 200 milliseconds from my cross-section. I already corrected that for you. Look how deep the Owambo basin area is. We got basin below 3 seconds, okay? That's a basin. This is not the Kavango deep. As a geologist, I will tell you my interpretation. This is the Owambo shallow. But there's more. Come on. Wonders of Zoom. Okay, so this is from their most recent investor presentation they published last week, in November. What are they still showing? 30,000 foot of sedimentary rock basin fill. And see this little hash gray area? That PPS stands for Permian Petroleum System. And I'm sure if you worked out the fractions on that, that would probably come out something like 6,000 feet or 2,000 meters. And look, even the wells they annotated look like they go all the way down to the bottom. And again, to the ReconAfrica investors out there, I will admit, I don't participate in social media, but I watch what you guys say about me. I see your memes about me and I laugh because they're funny. I should start a Captain Jack Sparrow used clothing workhouse because I used to have long hair and a big Captain Morgan beard, and that was on one of my websites, and they thought that was funny, made some memes of me. Good for you. All right, so what do we see here? Hopefully what I've taught you about seismic, what are they interpreting? Obviously this guy needs to take some geophysics classes because this is structure in the basement. And these red things are gas chimneys coming out of the crystalline basement. And, you know, I have to say, I feel bad because the marketing was super aggressive. Super aggressive. Because actually, there's a really interesting article out there that shows all of the exploration companies in Southern Africa, or at least most of them. And of the, I don't know, 11 they describe, 3 of them are oil plays, which are all in Mozambique. All the others on this side of Africa are tight gas shale plays. And these companies don't want to go to jail. They market, they say, hey, maybe there's something here. But they're not buying articles in oilprice.com. There was a short seller that published a report in July of this year, and they said they think ReconAfrica paid over $2 million in marketing, buying articles, podcast interviews. I mean, that's not what oil and gas companies do. They don't have to do that. Everybody's a scientist. They're like, here's my data room, come in, we think we got something. What do you think? Do you want a joint venture? I can't imagine an oil and gas company that knows what they're doing going into ReconAfrica's data room. I don't even think ReconAfrica will open a data room to the companies because that might sort of dispel the story. But they'll tell their investors, we're close to joint venture talks. People got really excited at these African Oil Week conferences we went to. And if you'll allow me, I'm going to move away from geology real quick, because what happens when a critic like me says, this is a crazy idea, what are we doing? What are we doing opening up the Kavango and the Okavango River Basin to this kind of project? The risks are enormous. Obviously, the company doing the work is not taking the risks seriously. They just get defensive and deflective, and they don't actually come to a public event we invited them to. This isn't a hit job on ReconAfrica. I invited them. I made sure the society put out the invitation to them, and none of them showed. So I don't want to be labeled as anti-development for Namibia, because if you talk to me, this country has more potential than any place on earth to leapfrog into this crazy, amazing Star Trek future. This country has so many resources. And I'm going to show you what that future looks like if you will allow me. There are only 2.5 million people in Namibia. What sort of investment would that require? Valdi, I know you said not to get emotional, but I feel strongly about this stuff. Change is already happening, and I'll show you why economically here in a minute. This is the US ambassador and the Minister of Mines and Energy, Honorable Tom Awindo, signing a memorandum of intent to build a 5 gigawatt solar power plant in Namibia and Botswana, largely going to be paid for by the United States and their Power Africa project. You know why? Because the big economies know we got rich burning fossil fuels. And we know to avoid disaster, we're going to have to pay for you guys to just leapfrog into the future. Because if everybody doesn't get to zero emissions, then it doesn't matter. We all share the global atmosphere. We all share the consequences of what's happening to our environment on a global, systemic, interconnected scale. It's not just the United States. Here's Germany. They want to make a deal with Namibia to do, they're really into green hydrogen. Let's push that project forward. Largely, let's admit, going to be paid for by Germany. This is just a taste of things to come. And here's the president at COP26 last week in Glasgow, Scotland, telling everyone there, hey, we have to collectively overcome the disconnect between a divided international system and the global calamity that threatens us all. Namibia is taking transformative steps towards honoring this responsibility. You know, another laughable thing from ReconAfrica, aside from their wastewater being fertilizer for the subsistence farmers, is that they're a net zero company, claiming they've found 120 billion barrels of generated oil that they'll produce some percentage of. How do you offset that? I mean, especially because this carbon offset, like the companies that are buying carbon offsets where they're like, we're going to pay money to protect this forest, and that'll offset our carbon emissions. I don't know if you've been reading the news, but all those forests are burning down. Just the most intense wildfires in California, in Australia, and here in Namibia. I wouldn't be surprised if some of you experienced some property loss from some of the bushfires that happened over the last couple of years. And then he says, we are taking these bold steps to enhance our energy security and decarbonize our country. By letting a junior Canadian oil and gas company come drill a frack play. Well, I mean, sorry, they redid the geology, it's a conventional play now. Like that's that much better. So from the president, I really would request that we see less of this with Craig Steinke, the CEO of ReconAfrica, and more of this, elbow bumping with, you're gonna love this one, a leader of a massive economy who could do a UK deal in Namibia. Because guess what? The Duke of Sussex, the Prince Harry, what did he just do? He put an op-ed in the Washington Post saying, this is crazy. What are you guys doing? And to that, I would say, okay, and I think it's great. Prince Harry, amazing support. But Namibia needs that backed up. Look, I'm just be honest. I'll tell you what I think. The UK royal family's got We don't even know how much money they got, but they got a lot of it. They could donate some of it to build green energy projects in Namibia. And I'm going to show you how awesome that future is now. Will you allow me to play a short video for you? This is the most incredible, transformative, inspirational thing we all need to know. The public, industry, entrepreneurs, leaders. I really hope there are some Namibian lawmakers in the audience, either in person or online, because this is a big deal. Namibia, with your 2.5 million population, the case studies they're going to show in this video are California, Texas, and New England. These are massive populations, tens of millions of people. Just think what the investment after you finish watching this video is going to be in Namibia. I wonder, okay, this is hyperbole. There's no evidence to back this up. But I wonder if a rich royal family could fund a big part of the bill on this one. So, what do you guys think about that? Is that idealism, pie in the sky? I mean, it is pretty ideal. I think we need a few more idealists, but that's hardcore economics looking at you in the face. Think about what that could mean for Namibia. Who here is off the grid in some way? Who makes their own solar power and throws it away because you have excess? It's already happening. Think about so the thing about an oil and gas investment is it's a depletion curve. It's not a renewable resource. There's a limited amount. It depletes. And there's very complex economics that go in oil and gas companies to understand what size system do we have to build to get the peak capacity production, because at some point it peaks and then we have all this wasted engineering that we spent. See that a lot in every oil and gas project. It also means you can't front load all your production, because to build that system would cost so much and you could only produce at that rate for a very short time. And then you have all this wasted investment in the engineering. I mean, think about that, what that means development-wise for Namibia. You could, instead of giving an oil company insanely, the reason Namibia has such great and attractive petroleum regime is because it's such a hard place to drill, in the sense like there's really no oil and gas in this country. The geology you need for that isn't here. In a really, in a first world sense, like the US is producing. So, that they tell companies like ReconAfrica, you can have 90% of the equity and just give us 10%. And on top of that, we'll make the royalty rate that you have to pay to the government on your production 5%. It's one of the lowest royalty rates in the world. And ReconAfrica is very upfront to their investors. This is a great investment. So we get to keep the lion's share of it. That's why there's a 90-10 split and a 5% royalty rate. It's because you can't attract companies into the country otherwise. It's too risky of an investment. But what happens if you start to tell companies, hey, we want your business, your technology firm, we want you to come into Namibia. And as a token, you get free energy for your factory. That's what we'll give you. We have all this extra capacity. Because I don't know if you saw, 91% of the days of the year in California, they have excess capacity, free marginal cost energy. What does that look like in Namibia, where the sunlight is 5 times as dense? 2.5 million person population. You will bring everyone out of poverty. And all the already doing well people will do even better. It's such short-sightedness. Makes my head spin. Why? Listen to what he said. We don't need carbon credits. We need leadership. Where are the leaders? Who is looking at this and going, oh my God, for this tiny investment, we could just make endless amounts of energy. We could become an energy exporter. Do you know how often, we have some South Africans in the audience tonight. How often are you guys load shedding to send energy to Namibia at the highest cost in sub-Saharan Africa? Namibians are paying the most for energy when they should be paying the least. It's crazy what this means. Crazy. Star Trek, people, we're there. We're almost there. Starts with the energy system. Okay, so I have some calls to action. I am not Namibian. I live here now. I'm so fortunate. And I apologize. As an American, I didn't even know this country existed a couple years ago. And I am ashamed. I'm ashamed of myself. This place is amazing. The people are amazing. The wildlife is amazing. The country is amazing. The geology, it's amazing. The geologist paradise here. Let's just get real. Recon saying it, hey, we're conventional only. This isn't a frack play. Don't worry about that. The Namibian government is saying it. When asked, the Namibian Petroleum Commissioner, Maggie Shino, she said, direct quote, you can repeat it again. We are saying it over and over again. You can transmit it and multiply it as many times as possible. This is the position of the Namibian government. There will be no fracking on Namibian soil. Okay? There will be no fracking on Namibian soil. Let's enshrine that into law. Where are the parliamentarians to put this in law? I've only heard one parliament member suggest this, and when he did, the chair of the Natural Resource Committee told him he was out of line. Shut him down, told the ministry, don't answer any of this guy's questions. Move on, next question. Crazy, crazy. This project has been flawed from the start, and I hope with evidence, with direct quotes, with the people who have experienced this company, gone to that February meeting, something's not right here. Where are the leaders to do an immediate drilling moratorium on the Kavango? This is a big decision. Is this really something we want to sacrifice for a short-term gain? And let's be fair, even if there is oil in the Kavango, how long are you going to be able to sell it for? That disruption is inevitable. It's on your doorstep. You're going to sacrifice this environment to produce oil, and then you won't even be able to make a profit on it. It's going to be what they call a stranded asset. Thank you, Prince Harry. And thank you, Reinhold Mungundu, a Namibian activist, poet. I think he's got a graduate degree in environmental science as well. Sorry if I got that wrong, Reinhold. But this guy's switched on. They wrote an article in the Washington Post saying, this is crazy. We got to let people know, sign the petition, get this thing stopped. We need a moratorium on drilling in the Kavango. And if you're interested and you feel that way too, go to this link and add your name. Let's get as many people as possible to show the Namibian government people don't want this. Nobody's seeing the shared prosperity from your Kavango project. Okay, this is from me after seeing it be done in the United States. Namibia needs a renewable energy bill of rights. There's a state in the United States that just passed this, and what it does is if you're a resident of their state, you have the right to collect, generate clean energy, use it as you need, and then there's a marketplace for you to sell it back to. So now, instead of popping up an Airbnb, and now housing prices in Windhoek go crazy because everybody needs to make a buck because it's hard times, I'm going to invest in a solar, making my roof solar. And then I'll never have to have load shedding. The power in Windhoek, if it goes off, doesn't affect me. I got all the energy I need. My batteries are on, and then my excess I get to sell back to the grid, and everybody's price tag comes down, 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 down. I can't believe the prices people in Owambo land and the Kavango are paying for electricity, this prepaid pricing. It's insane. They're paying like double the energy people in Windhoek pay. Why aren't we doing this? If we really want to bring prosperity to these people, develop them, give them a real future, why aren't we doing this? Okay, I've talked for a long time. This went way longer than I hoped for. I hope I didn't bore you, but my last call to action is Namibia. This is the country that leads the way, not the United States, not Europe, not the EU, not China. Namibia's gonna say, line in the sand. The age of oil, look, hey, if there was a magic button I could press today that would stop all fossil fuels, I would not press it. Humanity would come to a halt, a screeching halt. But at the same time, I'm not gonna say every investment, every leadership, every leader pushes as hard as they can to make that transition as fast as possible. I'm gonna push for that every day, because by 2030, you might be surprised what that world looks like. What Rethink X, they just published a new great video, not just talking about the energy sector, but the whole thing. And they show photos of New York in like 1905. And it's all, the street is full of horse and buggy and one automobile. And then in like 5 years, the same picture of the same street, it's all automobiles and one horse. Do you think people who lived in the time of horses and carriage knew what the automobile age would mean and how it would change their lives? They can't even picture it. Henry Ford even said, if I asked somebody what they wanted, they'd say a faster horse. That's why people don't see this, because you don't see what that new plateau is, that new tier we're going towards. And it happens fast. It's going to happen in a decade. And it's not going to be idealists like me saying it's going to be the economics are going to drive it. This stuff's not going to be able to compete with this level of abundance. So Namibia, lead the way, because I love the Namibian flag, and I'm not a flag person, I have to say. But this flag is so inspiring, because what does everything on the Namibian flag mean? And if you know Namibian history, you know Namibia went through a lot of stuff to get where it is today. The blue means it represents Namibia's precious, precious water resource. And coming from an American who grew up in New Orleans in the swamp country, I didn't realize what water scarcity was till I moved to here. And now water is precious, precious. And we need to protect it. And it is under threat by this project. The green is your lands, your wild lands. And Namibia is a special place because how much of Namibia is still epic wilderness, and the world is racing to rewild the planet because we need to. Biodiversity is collapsing. And it's also your food security, your agriculture. It's under threat by this project. The white is peace and harmony. And Namibia is a pretty special place because down in South Africa, it's not as peaceful and harmonious as it is in Namibia. And it's another reason why Namibia just inspires me, that so many people from so many cultures have created this incredible society. Hardworking people, don't complain, super friendly. Ask somebody from South Africa when they come up to Namibia and they're like, wow, everybody's super, super friendly here. That's been my impression. That's under threat by this project, because can you imagine an oil boom in the Kavango? Because then Angola's going to say, well, we got to get rid of our national forest to get our piece of flesh. And Botswana's going to say, the Sedila Hills, that's nice. But, we're hitting hard times, and we need our piece of that too. So that's under threat. That Kaza Conservancy could disappear. The red is the blood of the Namibian people, the people that sacrificed themselves to build this country, to liberate it, and build it is what it is today. And as I've shown you, I think the Kavango people are under threat by this project. And finally, from what I've shown you, with the revolution in the energy sector, and why do you think An ex-oil guy is standing here telling you this because it's already happened. The price of oil collapsed in 2015, and BP said, who wants to go? We're going to make this first round voluntary. Who wants to go? And I was following this stuff. I'm very interested in the energy sector, and I said, you know what? I don't think there's going to be a job for a petroleum geologist 10 years from now. I raised my hand. I got a severance package. I spent half of it paying off my student debts because America is crazy. You know how much I paid to go to the University of Oklahoma, which is touted as one of the cheapest schools in the country? And I changed my career. Your energy future, the one that actually puts Namibia #1 in the world, turns Namibia into an energy exporter, turns Namibia, and just the crazy things that could happen here, that is under threat by this project. And I've talked long enough. Thank you for your time and attention. And don't let me hog. I've hogged the, like, this is a public forum. I think people should, you know, there's nobody from the company here, but if people have questions, let's ask them. Maybe their PR person can get back to us later. The one in the back there. Oh, can you wait for the microphone?
So if So let me quickly set the rules. If you want to have a question, please say who you are and then keep it short and sweet and clear.
Thank you, Rian. Matt, just a question. When the water that's pumped into the fracking exercise, the 5 to 40 million liters, is it a once-off pumping in and then you have to redo it, or is it several times on one well?
So that's the volume per well. And now, because the technology's gotten so good, they can do multiple horizontals in the same vertical well. So in that case, when you're stacking frac pay zones, then you would stack those millions of liters of water if you have multiple zones. But if you just have one vertical that goes into a horizontal, then you would frac all those. But yeah, and maybe that's another reason why the volumes got so big. Actually, now that I think about it, it might be because they're stacking zones. So maybe it's better if I just say, I think that's a once-off per well, but you got to multiply it 20,000 times over 25 years.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Matt. Very inspiring talk. My name is Jan Arkett. I represent Frack Free Namibia and Soul, Saving Okavango's Unique Life, based in South Africa and just visiting Windhoek for a couple of days. Frack, I just want to mention something that I think is very relevant. It's not a question, it's a comment, and that is the creep that we noticed in the process that Recon is following. Originally, the EIA indicated that 2 wells, stratigraphic wells, were going to be drilled, and 2 wells were marked, and the details of those well positions were discussed in the EIA. But the second well, 6-1, that was drilled was never part of that initial assessment in the EIA. So in other words, it wasn't covered in the EIA, yet they drilled it. Then when the seismics came along, they indicated that the entire bit of seismic, the 450 kilometers, was going to be done along existing tracks and roads. And then they changed the tune and said only about 90%. So suddenly there was a creep again. Around about 40 or 50 kilometers of forest had to be removed in order to accommodate the seismics. Now I see, just with the release of the seismic data, that Recon have announced that they're now preparing for their detailed or extended exploration program to begin in the first quarter next year. I was also very curious to see that the Namibian Sun reported last week, Tuesday, the Minister of Environmental Affairs in Glasgow said that no drilling will be permitted because this is now part of the exploration process until additional EIA has been done. The first quarter of 2022 is in 2 months' time, or should I say a month and a half time, and clearly there is no indication of an EIA having been done. We've also got to bear in mind that the IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, came down quite hard, saying that there should or must be international strategic environmental assessment which covers all the adjacent countries, i.e. Angola, Botswana, Namibia, and possibly even Zambia. And that EIA must be done to international standards by a reputable environmental impact assessment team. In other words, stating that the current EIA, it does not meet standards. I'm not aware of any EIA taking place, but I think we need to be very aware of the creep that has happened, the work that has been done without permits, without water permits, and permits suddenly are issued, taking over land, and suddenly land acquisition is permitted. There is a creep that is continuously going, and I'm very concerned that this extended program that the Recon are talking about to start next year is just another extended program that is not going to be permitted. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, Jan. Sorry, maybe I should stand over here. I think that's very well said. I also have been concerned because it's clear from the initial drilling EIA that only 2, maybe 3 wells were permitted. I mean, by Namibian law, they are required to do another EIA if they want to extend their exploration program. They need another EIA for seismic. And what was really concerning a couple of weeks ago, in one of the geologists' presentations into a Houston Geological Society, he said, oh, you know, the Namibian government, they need some fire breaks cut in the Kavango, and then we can just do more seismic along those lines. I mean, says it all. It's not, and then, no, I'll stop there. Sorry, you had a question.
Who decides to do the, if an EIA is done, a new EIA, who decides who must do it? Because obviously that's the big question.
Yeah, so what happens is the company has a list of providers that they have to go to and hire, and then this supposedly independent environmental practitioner will do the environmental impact assessment, submit it on behalf of the company to the ministry. Now, I went to Dr. Roy Miller's talk about the uranium leach mining going on in the aquifer down in the Kalahari a couple weeks ago. And I met the EIA, like the firm that was doing the EIA for that company, and it was night and day difference. My interaction with Recon's guy and these people were objective and listening, and they were like, hey, we really want you to sign up and become an interested party. You're a geologist. We'd really like your feedback. Like, that was a company where I was like, okay, yeah, they're probably being an objective party on whether this is happening. And after that, a couple days after that talk, the Ministry of Water went in and revoked this uranium company's water permits. So when we had interactions with ReconAfrica's guy, he just started insulting us. Why are you against development? You know, why do you want to hold Namibia down? And he was saying this to a guy from the Kavango, who's head of a community forest. I mean, yeah, I think who you hire, so the company hires the environmental practitioner, but I think the process in ReconAfrica's case was, you know, that's why we're calling for a moratorium, because we don't feel it was done to the standard Namibia's law requires.
Hi, my name is Frank Steffen. I'm the editor of Allgemeine Zeitung. Just a few items on this whole issue. I obviously spent quite a number of days in March and then about 3 weeks ago up in Kavango. And the first thing that was, I mean, you clearly used some of the photos, and what was puzzling was that they were supposed, like Jan said, to only do the seismic along the existing roads. I followed at one stage 50 kilometers right through those, it's really Sandveld or Kalahari sand. And we came back along the way, and we followed different routes, basically spiking off from the main route. And those were wild bush routes. I mean, those were existing farm roads at best. Then we followed another route for about 2.5 kilometers. That was middle straight through the bush. And in the George Mukoya Conservancy, which is just above from Kawe, we followed what must have been easily 5 kilometers. Now, I know that Annette Hübschle is today listening in via Zoom, and she and a colleague of hers had quite extensive writing about the impact of seismic, the whole seismic exercise on elephants, who basically have a gland which does exactly what a seismic engine does, with the difference there's a huge amount of difference in pressure. Now, when I followed those seismic routes, I followed them about 2 weeks after they had happened. And the impression was about as deep as this, so I would say about up to 10 centimeters. And you could still see it, even though some first rains had fallen in some of those parts, and even though there was extensive burning and wind. So those things are there to stay. Having said that, the change in mind in ReconAfrica, when they suddenly had the water-soluble water mixture or whatever drilling concoction, the moment they started talking about it was when we not only visited Kawe and did those drone cover photos, but also when we went over to Mbambi. That was the photo where you see the grader. And with us having been there and seen that they only covered the rims of the pond, then suddenly, because from there I drove straight to Recon's office in Rundu. And then Claire Priest suddenly assured me, no, but this is, there's no harm to nature in this thing. And that's why they don't actually need the cover at all. So that was where the Mbambi came in. Now, I was back up there at Mbambi, like I said, 3 weeks ago, and that same liner is still along the rim. The well has dried out in the meantime. So it's exactly the same as before, and we once again made photos of that too. So my question in all of this is, no matter where you went, whether you take the water drilling and we can go on for hours now. My question is, if phosphate mining had to withdraw when the ECC was withdrawn from phosphate mining in 2016, simply because they had not adhered to the rules, then my question is, why doesn't the government do the same thing in this regard? Because time and again, no matter what you looked at, whether they took those grounds, whether they drilled for water, whether they did the test drilling for oil, whether they did the occupation, no matter what they did so far, each and every time they assure us that they're following the law, but each time it is after the fact. And so my argument is, if they withdrew the ECC of phosphate mining, they need to do the same in this case.
And if I can, thanks, Frank. If I can add, what happened last week to the uranium mining company? They broke the rules, and the ministry came in and said, you need to return your permits to the office on Monday morning. I mean, the amount of rule breaking and then PR like covering for the company by the people in power here in Namibia, it's stunning. Like, nobody's fooled. I mean, that's what it seems like to me. And there was even an article in the Namibian Sun that said that the cabinet was coming together to have put together a PR strategy to deal with the public about the Recon thing. So I don't know. I just don't understand why you would invest in this project when something way more profitable is on your doorstep. And I do implore the ministry to hold ReconAfrica to the Namibian law. And if they have broken the rules, they need to bring their permits in on Monday morning.
There will be one more question here, and then we have one more that we post from the Zoom participants. I can just mention that there are over 70 people listening in on Zoom. Well done.
And thank you, everyone. And I mean everyone, everybody from the company to investors, to the concerned public, to geological specialists, geologists, scientists, entrepreneurs, like that this was a public forum. And I'm glad that's what happened tonight.
Hello, my name is Liz Frank from the Women's Leadership Center. You might have seen in Friday's Namibian, we had a full page advertisement saying we are calling for a national ban on fracking. A few weeks earlier, we had a full page in the Namibian where we made public a petition that 120 Namibian civil society organizations have signed, that we took to Parliament, calling for a moratorium on the current exploration and a full public independent inquiry. We need people like Matt. We need people who know the health issues, the impact on women's reproductive health, for example, on fracking. We don't even have time to talk about that here because we need to understand the geology and the biodiversity and the water issues. But there are a lot more issues that we need to talk about. We need another whole night to talk about the impact on people's health of fracking. There's in the US, there's a concerned medical association that is collecting all the data coming out. Matt showed where all the fracking wells all over the US are, thousands and thousands and thousands of fracking wells. They're building them next to schools, they're building them next to hospitals. People wake up in the morning and there's a there's a drill pad being put right next to their fence. And people are studying the health impacts on, for example, congenitally deformed babies, spontaneous abortions, cancers. A study came out last week. Google on YouTube the health impacts of fracking. And this Physicians Association in New York, they actually collected so much information on the health impacts of fracking that led to New York State banning fracking. So the issues are much, much broader than elephants and water and biodiversity. It's actually people's livelihoods and people's lives that are at stake. And I think as Women's Leadership Center, we jumped into this because we are working with Indigenous San women living in Wastewater National Park, living in Muchiku near Divundu, whose voices have not been heard, who as San Indigenous people actually have the right to free, prior, informed consent to anything dealing with their development. So I think, Matt, we're a great team. We will take this further. We will broaden the issues. We will have another ad in the newspaper next Friday where we're looking at conventional drilling and what happened to the Niger Delta. It is ruined. People are poor. They've lost their livelihoods, their water, their fish, everything. So I'm really happy that this has happened tonight. And we, as Women's Leadership Center, we will keep pushing and we will create more forums for these kind of conversations. Thank you.
I'll guess I'll just end on that note. Does everybody know what an LD50 is?
Before you end,
Oh.
I've got one more question from the Zoom audience. It's from Mr. Cabrero. My question is double-sided in that on one hand, I'd like to know what your thoughts are in regards to how to stop the current Recon project in its feet and forever. But also on the other hand, what about the resources needed to build the wind and solar revolution that the man on the YouTube video praised about, especially when there seems to be a peak on all energy resources, which the IEA, International Energy Agency, acknowledged themselves in their latest report issued last month?
Okay, those are great questions. So I think the first question was around the resource. All right, it's been a long night. Can you just repeat the first question for me? Yeah, how to stop it. So in the United States, what we're told as American citizens is write your congressman, write your senator, write your lawmakers, your leaders, let them know how you feel. I actually don't know what to tell Namibians in terms of how writing your parliamentarians works here. How do you tell the lawmakers, this isn't cool, I don't want this in my backyard? Whatever that translates to Namibia, please do so. Please do reach out to your lawmakers, all parties. One thing that's really nice about Namibia is there's quite a few parties in this country. I know there's one dominant party, but in the States we're sort of held between two parties that look different but sort of behave the same at the end of the day. So I think there is, like, the winds of change are here. So I think, like the man in the video is saying, you know, this is about leadership. So we need our leaders to stand up, and we need the people to tell the leaders this is what we want, and make your voice heard and share it loud. Because you know, like Dr. Miller gave his presentation last week, and then the Ministry of Water tells the company that broke the rules, turn in your permits. It could happen next week. So maybe if people sign that petition, you know, that'll show people are serious about stopping this project. The second question around resources to build the batteries and stuff is a great question, because what happens, it's not like batteries are entirely benign. Some, you know, they're complex energy storage machines that have a lot of chemical issues themselves. And what I can say, my knowledge around that is that technology is rapidly developing, and there's all these sub-industries popping up like crazy, like battery recycling is happening at a rapid rate, because that's going to be a big industry. Think of all those Tesla cars, all those Tesla batteries that are going to need to be recycled at that point. The nice thing about batteries is they have multiple lives, second life, a third life, a fourth life. So it can go from a car to a power wall in your house to another application before it needs to get recycled. And I think my hope, because this is a very good question, the battery recycling industry will catch up to the production at some point. But you, the public, don't just let the battery companies come in and let them off the hook. We need to hold all these industries accountable to follow the law and keep us safe, and develop the technologies to do so. I know there are some energy shortage issues going around the world, but largely this is a fossil fuel problem. If everybody had batteries in excess capacity, you could make power at your own house. You wouldn't have to rely on NAM power. You wouldn't have to buy it from South Africa. And these investments are getting cheaper every minute. So, you know, I don't have the answer completely on the production issue, but the economics are such that I think the economics are going to drive this in large ways, and you won't see that be such an issue going forward. But it's not something I'm hyper specialized to speak on at this moment. Okay, and just Liz's thing about the chemicals in these frack wells. An LD50 stands for lethal dose 50. It's the amount of a substance that will kill half of a population of, say, like mice. How much of crude oil, if I put it on a rabbit, will kill 50% of the rabbits in my study? Every chemical on an oil well has these charts that kind of let you know how toxic it is. And that book of things telling you how toxic the drilling fluids are, the frack chemicals and all this, I mean, it's a laundry list. So I'm not surprised that 20 plus years after the frack boom, we're starting to see long-term consequences from a health impact across these areas where fracking really exploded. All there.
Thank you so much. I can just mention that we invited Okavango, the government's research branch on the quality of water, because you know that Rundu had a serious water shortage. You know that the people had to drink from the river. And the question that we had was, can you give us any fact on what the quality of the water is? Because apparently Namibia's water is already more polluted than that of Angola and Botswana. And if they have to keep drinking the water, then, as you mentioned, those serious health issues come. That's one comment. The other comment is that in the Namibian constitution, and guess who was the chief of the Constituent Assembly when our constitution was built? President Kavango. So I wonder if he's forgotten what got into this. It says Article 95, promotion of the welfare of the people, and it's under the principles of state policy. The state shall actively promote and maintain the welfare of the people by adopting, inter alia, policies aimed at the following. And then I only read the last one, that is 11. And it clearly says maintenance of ecosystems, essential ecological processes and biological diversity of Namibia, and utilization of living natural resources on a sustainable basis for the benefit of all Namibians, both present and future. The constitution is on the website. It's available in Afrikaans, English, German, and Owambo. So if you want to quote there, we had on the last talk a representative of the LAC, Legal Assistance Center, and he said, yeah, you can take the government to court on the constitution if you can prove that you are seriously impacted by the effects. So it's for the people that are affected that should join groups and then go to the government. That's what I have to say. I say thank you so much. This was really the longest talk that Scientific Society ever had without the people getting up and walking out. Thank you, Matt. You really kept us interested. The question is your presentation available? If people phone us tomorrow, send us mails, may we hand it off or shall we put them in touch with you? And may we give the recording out on request?
Yes, please share the recording far and wide. And I will send you a PDF copy and you can put it on the NAM Science website and people can download it from there. How about that?
Thank you so much. So there you got it. Also for those on Zoom. Matt, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
It's for me a bit of an embarrassment that it takes a foreigner to marry a Namibian woman to come and save our country. Thank you for staying, and thank you to your wife for bringing you here.
Yeah. And thank you, guys. Thank you.